Today on Lightning Bugs, I want to start with why we make music.
To begin with, we evolved a sensitivity to sound that goes back 800 million years. Music is, of course, hearing and making sound. And when I say it evolved for several reasons, one of them was probably to communicate things emotionally that are more difficult to communicate with words. I have the experience often, because I'm a bit on the autistic spectrum, where I don't really know how I feel about something. I'm having a feeling, but I don't know what it is. And so I'll put on the right piece of music and I'll go, oh yeah, that's how I'm feeling. That person nailed it. And it could be anything, not just emotion, but a state of being. The way music existed for tens of thousands of years was that it wasn't separated from dance. And still, in most cultures in the world today, and in most languages in the world, the word for music and the word for dance are the same word.
Really?
But that culture has never had a time when they needed to talk about them separately.
That is very interesting. Hi, if you're enjoying listening to Lightning Bugs, please rate and review us on Apple Podcasts. It helps a lot. And we're back. It's Thursday with another episode of Lightning Bugs. Today, my guest is Daniel Levitin. He's a neuroscientist, musician, and author. His research encompasses music, the brain, health, productivity, and creativity. And he's been a very productive and a very creative man for a long time. Daniel's published more than 300 articles. He's the author of 4 New York Times bestselling books. This is Your Brain on Music, The World in 6 Songs, The Organized Mind, and Successful Aging, as well as international bestseller, A Field Guide to Lies. He sings and plays the tenor saxophone, guitar, and bass. He served as a musical consultant, a producer, a sound engineer for several great music groups. Daniel's ears have influenced the work of Blue Öyster Cult, Chris Isaak, and many, many more. He's a super interesting person, personal friend of mine, and I think you'll really enjoy our chat. I was thinking, you said we've already started off just talking shit, but see what I think about these interviews before I do them because, my day job ain't podcaster and interviewer. And I said something to Emma last night. I said, I think with Dan, what I want to do is I don't really get to be the dummy very often. And she says, please don't say that. That sounds really egotistical. And then it said like all night long, I kind of soul searched about that. It's like, wow, is that egotistical? Do I really feel like I'm the smartest motherfucker in the room all the time? And actually, that's not true at all. What is true is that I always exist in a world where I'm the expert because I'm working in my office. So people are coming to me talking about music, and it's like, okay, yeah, I know about me and music, and so I'm the expert on me.
You're the one that people are interviewing usually, right? So
that's it.
You're the expert on you, and they want to know what you think, and you're brilliant at talking about you and your work.
Unfortunately, I've made a life of it. But, I guess what I was kind of the long way, what I was sort of getting at was that I thought it would be kind of cool if I could try to keep the questions, ask you questions that are the most boneheaded fucking questions, like not just the dumbest questions, because sometimes that's useful, and it's like I'm hanging out with you. It's like I want to ask you about, something more detailed, but I want to start with why we make music.
Oh, please don't ask me these bonehead questions. They are the hardest ones to answer. They're going to make me look like the dummy.
Well, that is kind of I enjoy that, though. That's when I know how I define the use of music, and it's pretty simple. And it hasn't evolved over my experience. And it would be nice if it did. Has your reason for why we music as a function, its most basic function, like not because we enjoy it or anything, but like why, even as a scientist and as a musician, you think we make music, has that evolved over the years?
Music probably didn't evolve for any one purpose, but for several. To begin with, we evolved a sensitivity to sound that goes back 800 million years.
Jesus.
Metazoa were simple organisms were sensitive to vibrations in their environment. They registered those vibrations, much like fish don't actually hear, but they have something like an eardrum that wiggles in and out like our eardrum does in response to wave patterns in the water. And they use that to tell them whether they're approaching a rock or whether a predator is coming towards them, all that kind of stuff. So it's kind of like proto-hearing.
Do they have any sense of frequency?
Oh, yeah.
In that vibration, so that is hearing in a way.
Yeah. So, music is, of course, hearing and making sound. And when I say it evolved for several reasons, one of them was probably to communicate things emotionally that are more difficult to communicate with words. I have the experience often, because I'm a bit on the autistic spectrum, where I don't really know how I feel about something. I'm having a feeling, but I don't know what it is.
Interesting.
And so I'll put on the right piece of music and I'll go, oh yeah, that's how I'm feeling. That person nailed it. And it could be anything. It could be Miles Davis or Sun Ra or William Boyce. It could be Ben Folds, Joni Mitchell. It could be.
And you started with your examples as instrumental examples of which I think is also, if you don't know how you feel about something and there's a feeling, which is actually part of why it's interesting to me, is that's the way I write. There's a feeling.
What do you mean?
Well, there's a feeling. Yeah. There's a vibe, a sense, a spark, a wrinkle, something. And chasing that, it could be happy or sad. And it actually doesn't matter. It's energy. I don't know. I'm going to follow it. That's very abstract. And your first go-to was Miles Davis, which is very abstract.
And yet I put on Miles and I go, oh, that's how I feel. I'm kind of happy, but I'm sad at the same time. And I'm energized and I'm lazy. And, trying to capture that in words is awkward and doesn't really give you the feeling of it. But I put on Kind of Blue and then you get it, or I do anyway.
Yeah.
So it's about emotional communication. And interestingly, when I write music, I'm exploring my feelings too, because I don't often know how I'm feeling about the thing I'm writing about. The process of writing kind of guides it somehow. It's hard to say. It's a chicken and egg thing, except that, I'd have to have some knowledge of what I was feeling to write it, or maybe not. It just comes out. I don't know from where. It's like Roseanne Cash says, she sticks up her catcher's mitt and catches something.
So then, for me, music is just communication. So I really, I'm always fascinated if I, stumble across or, see like Leonard Bernstein talking about the syntax of melody, and to me, it's like that's pretty much it. But then there's other ones too for you. Like, so number one, communicating something which is either awkward or inadequately communicated through conventional words.
Yeah. And
what's next?
So not necessarily for me, but for human beings, it's being able to communicate not just emotion, but a state of being. The way music existed for tens of thousands of years was that it wasn't separated from dance. And still, in most cultures in the world today, and in most languages in the world, the word for music and the word for dance are the same word.
Really?
But that culture has never had a time when they needed to talk about them separately.
That is very interesting. So if you think of it
that way, what was music dance accomplishing? Well, it was perhaps related to mate selection. You want to choose a mate who doesn't have a neurological disorder and who's got stamina and energy.
Then
If you
look
can
no further
sing and
than
dance-
Johnny Cash.
If you can sing and dance for hours on end, you're giving what biologists call an honest signal, meaning you can't fake that. You got to have some stuff going on for you. And so music conveyed that.
God, and this to loop back around to Johnny Cash, because as you pointed out, he is sending the signal in I Walk the Line in a literal way. He's saying that he is true. He finds it easy to be true. But then, of course, the poetic belies that, and we see that that's not true because that's what he's saying poetically. But he's not exactly, I mean, he had a lot of problems. So even though you think you're going to get the best mate that way, I would argue that me and most of my homies probably aren't. Right? How come so many great musicians are, this is kind of opposite of what you're saying in a way, but they're almost poster people for being not quite right?
Wow, you really nail it with these difficult questions. I'm speculating. Nobody's ever asked me this before. I've done 2,000 interviews now, probably half what you've done, but who's counting?
Yeah, shit.
But nobody's ever asked me that. I'd speculate it's because the way music was practiced for tens of thousands of years was that everybody participated.
Right.
There was no such thing as a music celebrity. There might have been a shaman or a knowledge keeper of a Native American tribe who kept the songs of the elders.
Mm-hmm.
But and then the singing and dancing. The person who could dance the longest and sing the longest might be more attractive as a mate. But then suddenly we have this industry. And you have to have a certain personality to put yourself out there and be on the cover of a magazine or the cover of an album to work through the business, which is in most cases a really unpleasant business to work with, the business side. And you're not playing for 100 of your tribe's mates. You're playing for 10,000 or 20,000 people.
Yeah.
But so I think the industry has sort of changed the calculus in that the kinds of people who are able to put up with this, who are willing to put themselves out there, probably need the attention, and they in a way that I'm sure
with you. I'm following that. I think that I agree with that speculation.
You've got to be the kind of person who can put up with that kind of punishment because you need the reward, the occasional reward, so much.
Right.
So
in a way,
that.
I mean, to interrupt you there, the assumption, you don't make the assumption that the famous musicians are the best musicians. You make the assumption that they're good musicians who also somehow thrive or work well with a whole lot of accolades and attention, and back in the proverbial day, even 1,000, even not 200 years ago, you didn't discern between people that way. Like it wasn't. There's a lot of great musicians. I know a lot of great musicians who will never be making an album. So for me to say, all the best musicians, they're all crazy. No, the best musicians are probably an accountant or a doctor down the road. The famous musicians are another issue.
I do think, there's a lot to unpack here. So I think that there are, truly exceptional musicians who are celebrities.
Totally, yeah.
Some of the best musicians in the world are celebrities. Stevie Wonder, Elton John, Joni Mitchell, Leonard Cohen. No question. But what I found, and I suspect you've had the same experience, is that I'll find musicians who are almost that good.
Yeah.
And better than 90% of the people whose records we have and whose names we know.
Mm-hmm.
But they, like you say, they're an accountant.
Yeah.
They're a drywaller. They don't want to go through the hassle of.
Yeah.
They may not want to tour. They may not want to have to deal with the industry, or they're just disorganized and they don't show up at the gig.
Right.
You know, lots of famous musicians had their careers implode when they didn't show up at recording sessions, or they didn't. It's not because they were on
It's
heroin.
happening to tennis players now.
I often tell people that some of the best music I've ever heard is music you've never heard.
Is there aspiration to do more with it and make their music more well known, or do you get the sense that they're happy just to make the records that they're making, and it'd be nice if they step another few?
So I got to tour with Tom Brousseau, and I've actually performed with Daniel Knox, and I performed with Claire and the Reasons, and but I actually toured with Tom for a couple of weeks, and I think they'd like to make a little more money because they're always a little bit close to the edge, but they're happy. Their ambition is to play music for people who they're in a small enough room that they can look them in the eye. They can talk to them after. They can pay their bills, or at least be able to afford to make another record, because these are all independently produced and distributed records. I think they're like a slightly larger audience, but they don't think about it. They think about the art.
I'm thinking about our inability to catch up to our technology and to our civilization, and I think that's pretty well something even your biggest dummy understands, is that we're biologically evolved, and then in the last couple hundred years, technology has gone absolutely bonkers. And so now, if I see sweets in the store, I'm one of those people. Evolutionarily, from an evolutionary standpoint, of course, if you came across some berries or fruits or something, right, you'd be like, this is energy, this is sugar. I got to store up and get all of this I can get now. Okay, here's my long thought. We listen to more music now than you can shake a stick at. I'm a musician, and it drives me nuts. It's not appropriate music. I don't want to dance like it's a fucking disco when I get in an Uber. I don't want to hear this loud crap between commercials. It's too much music. Is there something similar going on there? Is there such thing as too much music? And did we evolve to be so drawn to music, and now somehow we've broken it?
Wow. You don't pull any punches, man.
It's just things I think about.
Well, so this business about sugar, this is a very important point in evolutionary psychology. And what you're referring to in all of this is evolutionary lag. The idea that it takes 10 or 20,000 years for our genome to catch up with living conditions the way they are. So we're basically dealing with brains that evolved to deal with the world 10 or 20,000 years ago. That's how long it takes. And so, in the quantities that sugars and fats were available to our hunter-gatherer ancestors, what you said is exactly right. If they found a little stand of fruit trees, or if they found an animal, some protein source, it was a good survival strategy to load up. Mm-hmm. Now you open the pantry and, there's an unlimited supply of sweets and fats. And at any fast food restaurant, that's not adaptive. It's not healthy. It's led to the obesity crisis and the diabetes crisis. But the analogy with music, I think, falls apart for me.
Okay.
In that I don't think that I don't think we're listening to more music in terms of hours per day than our ancestors. They were musicking. They were a musicking species, and there was music that accompanied basket weaving and tending to your kid And there were rituals and singing around the campfire in the middle of the night to ward off predators and neighboring tribes, being vigilant. There was a lot of music, but it was probably a smaller number of songs.
Yeah.
Of course, you'll listen to more music in a year than your granddad would have heard in his lifetime, probably.
And it was probably getting one idea across and not as manipulative.
Right. And I think the big difference, though, in addition to all those big differences, I think the really big difference is that our ancestors didn't think of music as sonic wallpaper, as background, as, there has to be music on, as an accompaniment that you're not really listening to. You're hearing it, but you're not listening. And that's what I hate. I have this weird brain that if there's music on, I can't do anything else.
You just go for it. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I have to either turn it off or extricate myself because I can't concentrate. I become completely absorbed. And in that respect, I think I'm a dummy who's stuck with a 10,000-year-old brain because most people I know, you having a dinner party, turn on some music and talk over it. No,
I'm with music. You. I'm with you. That's tough. The only reason I like music at dinner is because I cannot stand to hear any food noises.
You have misophonia.
I've heard that has a name in the last year that seems to come out some, and that's one of the times I'm actually glad for a label because it justifies what an asshole I feel like that everyone else is okay with that. And I'm like, I can't do it.
Well, look, you might be an asshole, but that's not the reason you're an asshole.
It's a completely different subject. Well, back to this, I'm with you about the metaphor falling apart. Yeah, I'm sorry.
I want our viewers and listeners to know that I don't really think you're an asshole, that I cherish our friendship. And
I want the editors to cut that disclaimer out and just because we gotta start some shit. We're not going to get any clicks on this, Dan, unless we've got we start some shit. You have to start shit. I'm with you about the metaphor falling apart mostly, but I also think that living in a world now where you have to turn the music off and somehow somebody feels the need for it to be on all of the time. So we've come to this societal agreement that we just can't do without that. It becomes wallpaper and it becomes noise. And music is noise to me is demeans something that I'm really into.
And music that in many respects, as you say, it's trying to sell you something if it's an ad, or it's trying to sell you itself if it's a commercial piece of music. And so it's not. It's more like a sugary fast food treat than an actual piece of fruit that you picked. Where you went up to the tree and you selected it and you say, I'm going to eat this piece of fruit, and there may not be another one for a while, so I'm going to really enjoy this.
Wow, there's so many things I'd love to chase down. What I try to be with this podcast is useful about creativity, so that people, I think that in my experience, going to bat for the arts, for instance, I have found over the last decade or so that creativity itself, forget the arts, is pretty undervalued. We talk about it a lot, but when you go into the real world, the concept itself, it'd be much easier to go to bat for funding for arts if people understood how important creativity, ideas, and an artful way of constructing your life is, how successful that makes you. Then instead of putting a mere few pennies into arts funding and the funding for ideas, we'd put more. So from that, then I come to this point where I'm really just trying to, for instance, a scientist came to me once. I don't know what kind of scientist and what that means, but they were at my book thing, and he lamented that he wasn't creative anymore. And I said, well, what do you mean by that? And he's like, well, I used to play music. I used to make up things and I stopped. Now I'm just a scientist. Well, I mean, I don't know, but is science extremely creative as well?
If you do it right, yeah. But, a lot of scientists are like the Holiday Inn musician playing the hits. They're just following a script. They're more they're technicians. They're doing the experiments that need to be done.
Right.
It requires scientific training, but they're not trying to expand knowledge for its own sake. They're doing it because it's a job. You have that in any profession.
Can we judge those people at all? Do you think that is, I mean, like you need great studio musicians, and I look up to the great studio musicians. Do you see these scientists that are conducting these experiments as studio musicians?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there is real honor in that. Do you think there's much joy in it?
It's interesting. I think there is, and that I knew a doctoral student at McGill who did a very good thesis of original research, and when she was all done, she said, I liked doing the research. I liked defining the questions I was going to ask and figuring out how to answer them. That's basically what a doctoral thesis is in science. You posit 3 questions that have been unanswered. You figure out a way to answer them. You write up the results. Then you got a PhD thesis. When she was all done with her degree, she said, I like the doing the experiments part. I don't like having to think, what is it that needs to be done? I don't want to do that. And there are a lot of people like that. So she's working as a scientist. She has, you were talking about how you need somebody in the studio to tell the technical musician what to play. That is she. She's got somebody who's got vision who may not have the skills to actually conduct an experiment or do a surgery on an animal or whatever it is that's being done. But she's got that. And so they're a partnership. Yeah, you need them both. But, when you were talking about the arts funding, you triggered in me 2 thoughts that I'm really passionate about that are not just random. They circle back to the evolutionary uses of music as it happens. One of my thoughts about arts advocacy is that going back to ancient times, music in particular, more so than the other arts, was used for healing. And I know this is a topic near to your heart.
Yeah. Yeah, music therapy.
Yeah. I mean, the shamans knew this. It's in the Old Testament. King Saul was manic depressive, and when he would fall into depression, he'd call for King David. Well, not yet King David, David, of David and Goliath, who was supposed to be the greatest lyre player in the kingdom. David would play music and it would soothe Saul and he'd no longer be depressed. And then, we now know as scientists what everybody else knew for thousands of years, which is that music can help to lessen pain.
Yeah.
It can cure anxiety. It can reduce stress. It has immune system benefits. My lab and other labs are trying to work out all the ins and outs of the whys and the hows of how this works. But, we're basically saying, yeah, music has these huge medical applications. You're not going to get a healthcare provider to pay for it unless you can tell them why it works. They want to they want to see what's called the underlying mechanism. Or at the very least, you have to do a series of randomized controlled trials. So, with drugs, we have some new drug that's supposed to cure headaches better than aspirin or Advil. And so we give you either the aspirin or Advil or the new drug, but they look identical and you don't know which one you're getting. And maybe you get a third thing that has nothing in it. And we know that a certain percentage of people, their headache's going to go away anyway if they do nothing.
Right.
And so we have to have these comparison groups to figure out, well, does one group really get better faster or more thoroughly than the other. But it's difficult because what is a control for music? How do I play you something that has the effect of music that's not music? Or how do I have you not know that you're getting the music and still have you be engaged with it? It's not that there's no answer, but it's complicated.
Yeah. No, I've noticed that about talking with scientists, neurologists, doctors about music is how difficult baseline is with anything that you're studying with music, right down to being in a brain scanner. That's absolutely unnatural way to make music. There aren't, there have to be problems with it. If you could hook all this up to me while I was playing a show and I wasn't aware of it, then we'd really learn something about my brain. But
we did do a study like this. We hooked up. I mean, I had a colleague, Teresa Marin Nakra, who designed a conductor's jacket. She called it.
Huh.
It was just a jacket, but it had a bunch of sensors in it that checked out that kept track of heart rate, respiration rate, core body temperature, a bunch of things. And we finagled Keith Lockhart of the Boston Pops to wear it at a concert. And then we had some of the musicians and some of the audience members wear them too.
Interesting. I love that. Something I do each time on these is get my guests to give us a creative exercise. And you may have been prepped with this or maybe not, but you'd be able to pull one out of your ass anyway. But the idea is we're all creative. We all have something that we're either having ideas about creating that we're frustrated about. And I'd just like to get exercises from my guest that might help us in our creative endeavors or help sharpen our skills.
Since I last saw you, I went and visited the Dalai Lama at his compound in Dharamshala. Awesome. What I took away from our meeting, that over my shoulder here, you can see a picture of the two of us together.
Oh, great.
That's coming through. I have it there to remind me to practice gratitude. He meditates on gratitude every day. And so my exercise that I've been adopting since I met him is every morning I wake up and I look around the world I'm in and I think of something that I might be taking for granted. And I look at it and I think about it and I say, I'm grateful that I have this. And it starts the day off in a completely different way than so many of us who get bound up in the materialist purchase culture. The easiest way to be unhappy and depressed is to focus on the things you don't have, or that other people have and you don't have. But it's very difficult to be unhappy if you're happy with what you have.
Yeah. So I think that's something we all need to hear. And when you wake up in the morning, then is your exercise that you wake up in the morning and before you get out of bed, you do, how do we make this an exercise? So we're going to all do it for a week.
It's not before, it might be before I get out of bed.
Okay.
But part of the rule is I can't repeat myself. So I might wake up in the morning, I look at my wife and appreciate her very much.
Then you have the Heather song.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, I'm so touched that you not only listened to my music, but that you liked it. You know what I was grateful for this morning? When I logged into my email, there was an email from you saying that you really liked that album, Turnaround. And Ben, you were talking about people who have an aspiration. Do I aspire to be like famous as a songwriter? I'm more in the Tom Brasseau camp. I mean, I'd like to have that ambition to do, to be able to do what you do, but realistically, and my ambition has been met with that album and with the new one. When people like you, people who have brought me so much pleasure in my life, musically, say that my music brought them some pleasure, or they just say, good job. So, you, Joni Mitchell, Donald Fagen from Steely Dan, Graham Nash, Victor Wooten, Tom Brasseau, when they say, wow, I like that. That is all I could hope for.
That is very satisfying, isn't it? I find the same thing to be true. The numbers are the numbers, and will eventually lead to the perspective that there are a lot more people left. What you don't have is the number of people who have approved of you, or the number of people who have even heard your music.
The other thing I wanted to touch on, though, as a use of music evolutionarily, and another motivation for the arts, is that in addition to helping us with our overall health, in all these ways we've been talking about, pain, anxiety, stress, fatigue, music seems to ease interpersonal tensions and conflicts in such a way that it can be used for conflict negotiation.
Yeah, of course.
And it's probably always been the case that people who disagreed about things, if they were to play music together, notwithstanding Ray Davies and Dave Davies, who were always, at each other's throats in the Kinks, there's always an exception. But for the most part, it seems as though listening to music together and playing music together has these physiological effects. Our lab showed a few years ago that when people listen to music together, their brain waves literally synchronize.
What do you mean by brain waves synchronized?
Well, your neural activity can be expressed as electrical patterns, which are waves, and we might call them alpha waves and gamma waves and beta waves, but they're waves just like the waveforms on your radar audio recorder. And they synchronize. People's neurons fire together, and they fire in similar ways together when they're listening to music together. We haven't yet done the experiment where people play together, but it stands to reason because you have to listen to play together.
Yeah.
And it suggests that if world leaders needed to negotiate a treaty or a pact or something, maybe they should listen to music together or play music together first to lower their resistance.
Non-musical people. I don't believe in that, but when you say getting two leaders in a room to listen to music together, I think of one recent leader who I highly suspect doesn't give a fuck about music.
That's absolutely true from what I know about that person.
So is that a sociopathic trait?
Well, go back to evolution again. So the idea of Darwinian theory is that we've got there are these two parts. There's descent with modification and random mutation. And so every time an organism reproduces, whether it's an ant or a human or any, a tree, it needs to pass on its genome. And there are transcription errors. You never pass on exactly the genes that were in you. And, with sexual reproduction, half the genes come from you, half the genes come from your opposite sex spouse. But
the original he said, she said.
Right. They're not copied perfectly. You get random mutation. And so you end up with things like people who, believe it or not, don't like chocolate. I mean, that happens.
That's crazy.
It has to. There's random mutation. People who don't like sex, people who don't like to be touched, people who don't like music. It falls out of Darwinian theory.
Is that a spandrel?
The idea is that
is that spandrel? I've never known. I've always wondered. Spandrel is a
separate thing.
Separate thing. Okay, continue.
Yeah. So the idea here is that if if we all just were dealing with the same genes that Adam and Eve dealt with, a single virus could come along, apropos of 2020, and wipe out the entire human population because viruses are opportunistic. They'd figure out, they're modifying their genome too. Just by random mutation, some virus would come along that no human on the planet has resistance to and wipe us all out. So the fact that we're always changing up our genomes makes us resistant to mass
It's like evolutionary
annihilation.
spitballing.
Exactly. It's exactly that. So yeah, there's people who don't like music. We estimate about 5% of the population. But, there's people who like and don't like all kinds of weird things. There's, it just comes out that way.
That's, unmusical. Because some people will say they're unmusical, but then I think about all the things that they have to accomplish in a day, which require really big chunks of music. I mean, for one, if the pitch of my voice starts going up, you don't have to have perfect pitch to know that I may be getting anxious, nervous, need to get a point across. You can tell so much about that. If you're trying to cross traffic and it's like getting faster and faster, the acceleration and the tempo and the cadence, you're not going to get hit by a car. I feel like all this is music. Am I making music too big when I say those things?
I don't think so.
Yeah.
I think those are
so these
the
people
elements
just don't like listening to music. But in the case of said recent leader, he has, it's been something has been very successful besides being born into a fuck ton of money. Something has been very successful about the that particular organism has flourished. But to my mind, would be the one person that I would say would be impervious to music. But maybe I'm wrong. I
think that's true. I was at a wedding with him some years ago. A mutual friend was getting married.
Hillary.
Right.
Oh, sorry.
I was at a wedding with this leader many years ago before this leader was a leader. But there was great music. Lionel Richie was playing.
Awesome.
And put on a great show. A number of great performers. And everyone in the room, there were maybe 500 people at the wedding. Everybody was into it. I mean, even if you weren't into Lionel,
he
put on a great show.
Yeah. Oh, he's so good.
And this one individual who we're talking about, he was just like, he was looking around the room. He was not getting it. Nor was his wife.
Oh, that's interesting.
Strange. It was really strange. And I noticed it back then, just, not thinking that this person would ever become a political leader, but I thought it was interesting.
Yeah.
And I thought about this idea, well, okay, evolution, you got some stuff, you didn't get other stuff.
Yeah.
But, I think...
And he has a very musical voice, incredibly musical voice.
Yeah.
I actually love his voice.
Yeah, he's got elements of music, for sure. Tempo, pacing, dynamics. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, knows how to drop a hit too. Really knows how to drop a hit. I mean, like, are you serious? Like, you wake up this morning. The reason he's not on Twitter is it's not fair. Like, he was getting all the hits.
Yeah, he was.
So as I'm trying to be useful, I do talk to a lot of parents who ask me, who knows nothing about this, when their kids should start music. Should they start music? What if their kids start music and they hate it? Should you make them do it more? These kind of unanswerable questions. But it's always helpful to hear someone who spent their life studying music and the brain and music itself. If you were the boss of everyone's kids, how would you go about introducing them to music, and what role would that play in their development, ideally?
Wow. Big, difficult question. Sounds simple, very, very difficult.
Yeah.
I think that it's never too young to start playing an instrument.
Mm-hmm. That's huge. Yeah.
I think, I would say that I would say good advice would be to play for your children or your grandchildren or for kids that you know all the different kinds of music you can get your hands on. Expose them to it early. And I don't just mean like country and jazz and rock and metal.
Country and Western. Yeah.
Right? I mean like Persian music, Nusrat Fateh Ali Khan, EDM, drum and bass, indigenous peoples' musics, because during the first 6 or 8 years of life, those young brains are literally wiring themselves up to what they hear.
Mm-hmm.
And most kids begin to develop preferences, but those preferences are limited by what they've been exposed to.
Right.
The primary mission of the brain shifts after around the age of 10 or 12, and it's no longer such a sponge. So if you had heard, by analogy, look at language. If you had heard French and Japanese and English as a youngster, really young, you'd speak all of them without an accent. It'd be native to you. Try to learn them after the age of 12 or 15. It's tough going. It's not going to happen automatically. Right. You'll always have an accent. Same with music. Expose them to a lot, and most kids will sing along. We talk about this well-known period of babbling where kids are playing around with sounds before they speak, like goo goo gaga, boo boo ba ba, but they musically babble. All kids, they're they're playing around with pitch trajectories and melody and rhythm, and they do this. And so I think the next step is that a kid will say, at some point, what is that? And you might show them people playing instruments. And most kids will say, what do you have to do to play an instrument? And I think you can encourage your kids to play an instrument. The tricky point, as you said, do you force them? I think that this tends to go south when the parent has a very particular idea about the particular instrument they want the kid to play.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
I think the more practical thing for a kid to learn music and an appreciation for art, for literature, theater, dance, and visual arts, sculpture, painting, I think the payoff there is that the arts allow us to recontextualize the world, to see the world differently, to understand the experiences of someone whose life might be very different from ours.
Yeah.
And talk about conflict resolution or changing someone's mind. It's very hard to get someone to change their mind by giving them the data and facts. That aforementioned politician,
has proven pretty ineffective in the last few years. Yeah.
But if you expose somebody to a set of ideas through art, and the art reaches them emotionally and opens up their hearts, the mind will follow.
Yeah. You said the exact same thing as my last victim on the podcast, Roger Payne. Do you know Dr. Roger Payne?
No.
He is someone you should know. I should introduce the two of you. He discovered whale songs.
Oh, the biologist, yes.
Yeah.
Humpback whales. Oh, he's fantastic.
Yeah. And he's
just like 85 years old now.
Yeah. He's impressive. So interesting. Yeah. But he said that he didn't think there was anything more important now than explaining what is happening to the earth. And it can't be done through data. It has to be done through art.
I agree. I totally agree. And so, that's why you teach children music.
Right.
Is that's going to change the world.
It's funny because one of the things I actually wanted to ask you about was because you had done a TED Talk, I think years ago on stress. I'd wanted to ask you about nerves and music. But let's maybe I save my my sticky notes and when I do season 2, the return of of Dan Levitin. Hi, if you're enjoying listening to Lightning Bugs, please rate and review us on Apple Podcasts. It helps a lot. Thank you so much for watching Lightning Bugs on YouTube. Check out more episodes and subscribe if you have not already. You can also listen to Lightning Bugs wherever podcasts may be found.